And hopefully this will assist us in tackling the major challenges for society over time.
That's the hope. The hope is it makes life better, and we have seen that with prior technological revolutions. We've seen that with computers, with the internet, with phones. There are some drawbacks, of course, especially at the beginning with the Industrial Revolution. People lost jobs. It was kind of a tough phase, but in the long term, it improved things. And we just gotta hope that's the case because it's coming.
And that, to wit, the next episode of the show, episode number 800, I interviewed my 94-year-old grandmother who was born in Ukraine and emigrated to Canada in the 1930s and had no electricity. And I said, "Is there anything you miss about life back then?" She's like, "No." this is way better.
Uh-huh.
And so it is interesting, sometimes you have this feeling like there are things that happen, there are negative consequences. Some that Yuval Noah Harari talks about repeatedly in his book Homo Deus, is that the kinds of things that for all of the rest of human history, or probably all of the rest of the history of living things on this planet, hunger, famine, war, that in recent decades, particularly, things have flipped on their head where, for example, with hunger, for all of the history of living beings on our planet, as far as we're aware, just being able to eat and survive was probably the most fundamental issue. And today, more humans on the planet die from diabetes, from overeating, than from hunger. And there's all kinds of things associated with that, like what is the quality of the nutrition, what is the quality of the calorie, that kind of thing. But still, as like a general oversimplification, that fact that people are dying from overeating more than undereating, and that's a very recent thing in this world. We're in a completely new kind of paradigm, and hopefully, there's kinds of reasons why you could be very then concerned, because you think, okay, well, maybe we've plucked the low-hanging fruit of, we've been pumping hydrocarbons out of the earth, which has spurned a lot of this growth. We're still today, as much as probably most podcast listeners, we to this show, and I'm sure you and I, hope that we'll be able to phase out hydrocarbons soon. Still today, in terms of global energy mix, and in almost all Western countries, regions, we're still super dependent, like 90% or more of energy coming from hydrocarbons. And so and things like even just extracting ore or other raw materials out of the earth, we've plucked the low-hanging fruit of like the easily accessible things. And now we're like, how do we do deep sea exploring for this ore? And so there's a case to be made. There's a skeptical case of we pulled out the low-hanging fruit. Where we are today is the pinnacle of quality of life for humans, and from here on out, it's going to be a poop show. And that's what that dystopian view is, what pretty much all scripted dramas of the future play on. It's very rare. It's fewer than 10% of TV shows or films about the future have a utopian thing. But it seems to me like that's where we're going. And so it's a weird thing. Like, it seems like people in general are like, and when we did New Year's Eve this year, the overwhelming sentiment at the New Year's Eve party I was at was like, wow, lucky we made it another year with all these things that are happening. And it's like, well, I don't know. I think things are getting better all the time. I'm really optimistic. I think that AI can play a big role paired with us. There's lots of issues we need to navigate, but I think that we could be looking at a super abundant future. Things like being able to crack fusion energy, having a bunch of suns on the planet generating effectively limitless energy. I mean, we could have many, many orders of magnitude more energy. And then with that, plus human level intelligence that's trivially easy to deploy wherever you want, problems like, okay, we've got too much carbon in the atmosphere. We have abundant energy and intelligence. Let's just have the machines rig things together to take advantage of that fusion energy and pump it into the ground.
Yeah, I think when I made this kind of thinking switch, and this was just a couple of months ago, when you sort of realize or believe that AGI, human level intelligence, is coming. It's coming in a few years. It's easy to sort of just have, well, of course, you have a mind blown moment, but then it's kind of weird where now you're living with this knowledge. You're almost living with knowledge of like a meteor is coming, or you know that everything is gonna change in a couple of years, and the world is chaotic and overwhelming, and there's enough bad stuff going on as is, right? But to your point, I think it's important to at least remember that things will improve in some ways and things will get worse in some ways. And in general, things have improved in a lot of ways as technology has evolved, right? The last World War was a long time ago. The Cold War ended. My parents lived in the Soviet Union, and certainly, even with all the flaws and badness and everything that we have in the world, most people don't live in the Soviet Union anymore. So, anyway, I guess the point is human level AI is coming. It's easy to think that we are heading towards a dystopia for sure, but just to kind of keep your sanity, it's important to think, well, hopefully it's not a full-on dystopia. It's just some things are going to be bad and some things are going to be good, and that's life.
And so, interestingly, your co-host on Last Week in AI, Jeremy Harris, whom we talked about a lot at the onset of this episode today, the Super Data Science episode today, he is really concerned about this AGI event. He thinks that there is, at least enough existential risk, and exactly what existential means. You guys did a great episode. I'm gonna link to it in the show notes for this episode. There's a fantastic episode of your show where you two debate, and you go into a more granular detail than I have heard anywhere else before or since. Yes, I'm sure there's all kinds of resources that people could dig into more, but for me, as a podcast listener, I thought that was a great introduction to this stuff. Really in depth, and in that, so you guys have these different perspectives. It comes up on the air of your show periodically, where you're generally optimistic about AGI, and that unleashing what some people call Ray Kurzweil's term, the singularity, a point that will change the world so much that we can't predict what anything will be like beyond that. Despite all those unknowns, you're generally optimistic. And I think Jeremy is generally optimistic as well, but simultaneously he believes that there's, if there's even a 10% chance, or even if there's a 1% chance of all of humanity being wiped out, or a large portion of humanity being wiped out, we should be concerned. We should be putting some resources into it. And so,
certainly there are different perspectives and different things that people take away from the knowledge that this trajectory, if you assume that the exponential improvement trajectory is going to improve, which some people don't. Some people say it's logistic function. It's like, looks like the exponent will keep on going, but some things flatten out, like airline travel as an example, some technologies, storage of compute, our ability to make, energy. There are examples where for a while it's exponential, or Moore's law, for instance, right? They're exponential, but there are some fundamental physical laws or something that means that you flatten out. And it is true, I think, it is important to observe that GPT-4 came out a year ago. We've had some improvements with GPT 4.5 and Claude and Gemini, but they're all still at a GPT-4 kind of level, and we don't have GPT-5 for quite a while. So it could be that you flatten out. We don't know. We just don't. My change was primarily driven by this idea that it doesn't seem likely we'll flatten out. And certainly there are people, very intelligent, very reasonable people with an AI like Jeremy, who believe things like, in 3 years, there's a 20% chance of 50% of humanity dying because of AI, which again, is mind-blowing. It's like, if you live with this knowledge and this belief, how can you sleep at night? But you gotta keep living, and that's why we have people working to at least avert that possible future, to make it so you can't make nuclear weapons and various kind of misuses of advanced AI. And we do need those people, even if I don't exactly agree with how concerned they are.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and it's interesting how if a lot of resources go into preventing, say, existential risk or really bad outcomes from AGI, and then when AGI arrives, no really bad things happen. It's like, who was right? Because you kind of, if it was because of the fuss made now that the funding went in and so disaster was averted, it's like, this cynical perspective is right either way.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
There are examples of humanity getting it right with things like nuclear power, where certainly there was a possibility of the end of the world, right? People were afraid of the Cold War and the possibility that we'll have like the Fallout series and games of we just nuke ourselves into dystopia, and we have it, right? So that is, in a way, kind of impressive.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will not be quite so radical, but who knows?
Nice. Well, so we ended up talking about this for quite a while, and this was not exactly on my plan, on my roadmap, but obviously, what is a bigger issue to talk about? And so to some extent, it probably made sense that we focused on this for a while. Obviously, something you and I both are really interested in. And
when you follow the news and you see how much is happening every week, I guess that's what you start thinking about.
Yeah. And it is interesting how, as you start to really believe that this is coming, it does change. So for me, for example, it has caused a shift in the things that I appreciate, in the sense that I have made over the last year, and I'm continuing to make changes in my life that allow me to focus more on time with my family, with my loved ones, with close friends, and also and things that are really important to me outside of work that I really enjoy, like exercise, prioritizing those things, because I'm kind of like, it seems obvious to me that there's going to be such huge paradigm shifts coming in the next few years that a lot of the things that we work on aren't going to be that important or meaningful.
It's, I suppose, a good reminder to just, do the things that make life good, right? Go into nature, touch grass, do all those things, that you should do anyway, instead of doom scrolling the internet. And don't try to do things even as the world changes at a ridiculous pace.